Well, welcome everyone to our session on the science of strength training for older adults. You guys aren't geeks about science stuff, are you? Yeah, maybe not. Well, I am, so I'll do the dirty work for you as we kind of walk through this. We are going to look at quite a bit of the research here because if we're going to look at the science, the evidence, that's what we have to look at. And I'll kind of set the stage for that a little bit so it's not kind of too overwhelming. But, you know, this is a really timely topic. It's one I'm really interested in. I teach in a doctoral physical therapy program. That's kind of my real job. That's my daytime job. And as part of that, we teach about aging, and I teach about kind of the possibilities of aging, and we look at different methodologies related to older adults. And from a physical therapy perspective, you know, physical therapists tend to see, right now at least, kind of the worst of the worst, right? The frailer, way more deconditioned individuals. But there is a whole spectrum out there within the older adult population. And so when we think about a topic like strength training, it's really tough, right? It is so broad and it's so deep. And so we're going to have to set some limiters on our conversation. Again, we'll kind of do that as we go through. But this is something I'm very interested about. In fact, the reason that I decided to do this, I put this in as a session for the Idea Personal Training events last year, and I did this session at those Idea events earlier this year, except I had an hour and 45 minutes to do it, and now we've got to really condense it down to an hour, so we're really going to speed through some things. But I did that really to force myself to really jump back into the science and the literature, to force myself to get in there, really update my own knowledge about where things have been over the past few years. And it's been very helpful to do that. So when we look at what's going on in the fitness industry today, we know a lot of things are changing. When we think about the possibilities of aging, people are embracing that. And so there's a lot of different techniques that are being proposed related to how seniors should exercise. There is a gym called Gray Still, and it is run by an ER physician. He was a former ER physician, and he opened a gym based on some really basic strength training techniques. It's squat, deadlift, bench press, heavy rows, and then a little bit of intermittent cardio. And that's kind of all they do. That is the whole program. And so he talks a lot on his videos about how beneficial this is for frail older adults. And so the question is, all right, is that what we should be doing? Should we all be, to getting all of our clients, really heavy loaded, get them under the bar? His little tagline is, I get you under the bar, I can change your life. Okay, so again, is that what we should all be doing? We're going to hear from Evie Flaherty later, who is the co-founder of Aging Evolution. And a big part of their group, in fact, their founders, are all older physique competitors or bodybuilders. They're now in their 60s and 70s and still kicking butt and looking good. And this is Evie right here in the pink top that we're going to hear from later. She's 64. And so, but again, they are following a very hardcore bodybuilding type routine. They're spending a lot of time in the gym lifting weights. They're also eating a very specific dietary pattern. So again, and we look at some older bodybuilders. Who are some older bodybuilders that come to mind that are out in the media today? You don't know any? Arnold Schwarzenegger is one. Lou Ferrigno. Sylvester Stallone, right? We see these, and these guys, Arnold kind of went downhill for a little bit, but he's back at it. Stallone has never backed off. And you see him today and like, oh my goodness, the guy is still amazing. Again, is this what we should be promoting and having all of our older clients do? And then you've kind of got the growing bolder evidence, which is not based on a bunch of heavy lifting at all. It's about getting out and competing in a sport, just being active and being engaged. More endurance type sports or skill-based activities. And we see all these great videos and the evidence that you can live really well. So what does the science say? What does the research say about strength training specifically? And it's hard to pull this thing out because within our culture, we still have this, right? Can we do the pink dumbbells? Okay? Can we sit in the chair, do some basic leg extensions, do some easy resistance band stuff? Is that good? Is that beneficial? So we have the gamut, don't we? And so it's hard to pull this out of kind of different modes of exercise. We're kind of looking at it without thinking about balance training necessarily or aerobic conditioning necessarily. We're just going to look at the strength training literature. And so our limiters are going to be, we're going to look at some outcomes. And our outcomes, we're going to look at bone mineral density as an outcome, because strength training definitely has a relationship to that. And we're going to look at strength itself and then at function, or what we might call longevity or disability. Okay, we'll kind of look at that together. We're going to try to break it down into some different populations from frail to fit and see, do the rules not apply equally to everybody? Do some people need more of something and less of something else, and vice versa? What does the research say about that? And then some of the variables that, there are so many variables that we can manipulate in strength training. You know, there's the load, the number of sets and reps, or the volume. There's the equipment that you use, the type of movements that you use. What does research say about this? And then also some concepts and philosophies that kind of underpin all of this. So when we look at the research, this is what we call an evidence pyramid. And at the top of the pyramid, from a research perspective, are the higher levels of evidence. What we're going to say, this is more important stuff. The systematic reviews and the meta-analyses are what I'm going to focus most on. That's what I will go to really find the evidence, because those are studies of studies. They basically say, all right, I'm going to look at all the randomized controlled trials about this topic. I'm going to collect them. I'm going to put them together and try to make some sort of sense out of all the different studies. Okay, that's kind of the top of the pyramid. So that's what we're going to focus on, although there are also some really good single group designs or other types of designs that are important as well. But here's the thing, this is what I tell my students. One study does not a conclusion make. You have to remember that. The media likes to blow up a certain study. It's like, oh my gosh, this is the next best thing. But you have to be careful about that. And as an example, we look at something like in the healthcare field of estrogen replacement therapy, right? All the lower quality studies supported the use of estrogen replacement therapy for all women. Then the government, the NIH, I think it was specifically, funded this large-scale study that said, let's really look at this, and they stopped it early because they found the risks of estrogen replacement therapy for certain women. Okay, so they stopped it. So higher level of evidence, a better study design refuted the lower evidence. So we just have to be careful. It's a mess trying to disentangle a lot of this research. So I can't focus on everything. Here's our hierarchy of functional aging that looks at individuals from frail or that are dependent all the way up to being elite athletes. And so we try to break it down according to, okay, do some of these lower functioning individuals need something different than maybe higher functioning individuals do? And when we look at function, this is our model of physical function. If you've gone through our certification course, you've seen this. We know that different domains, we call them, so the kind of the big circles that are kind of out here, or the big, what are these, hexagons? I don't even know what they are. Big shapes, we'll call them big shapes, okay? Are our primary domains. We know there's good evidence for all those feeding into function. Okay? They're all important. So we are really pulling out one kind of slice of the pie here when we talk about strength training as a part of that. So we know there's kind of different elements at play here. And when we think about the trajectory of aging that people are going through, again, where people are on that trajectory, is there a different intervention to meet that different location on that trajectory? And it's not just about age, is it? It's about a host of other variables. So we've got a kind of lot to think about. So let's first look at bone density and look at the literature behind osteoporosis and osteopenia. So here is a recommendation that was published, Exercise for the Prevention of Osteoporosis in Postmenopausal Women, an evidence-based guide to the optimal prescription. And in that paper, when they looked at a lot of different types of evidence, and what they recommended is captured in these tables. They do recommend progressive resistance training, at least 2 days per week, really focusing on heavier loads for the resistance training, and using that as a primary exercise method for improving bone density. And what we've seen with improving bone density is that you have to get a certain amount of loading or intensity on the bones for the bones to respond. That there's kind of a threshold of load that you have to get to in order to get that bone density increase that we're looking for. And so they recommend this more higher load of training. What's also interesting, though, is they have looked at the evidence about power training, seeing that power training is beneficial as well, and maybe even at lower loads. Because when you do power training at lower loads, the load is applied quicker. There's a faster loading rate, and that is also a stimulus on the bones. So higher load if you're doing slow, controlled movements, or you can use lower loads if you're using more explosive movements. I think those two things are really important. As far as the exercise goes, this is where the evidence is really weak as far as what different types of exercise movements we need to do. So they recommend things like, squats, lunges, hip abduction, adduction, anything that's going to get to those primary areas that we see with bone density causing an issue. But then they also recommend other weight-bearing impact exercises in order to provide a well-rounded routine, including jumping as part of that, and then also balancing. And what I like about what they're proposing is working on balance can help your bone density at all. No, it's not going to help your bone density at all. What is it going to help? Fall prevention, right? So that if you do fall, well, you don't want to fall, but if you do the strength training and you do the balance training, hopefully you won't fall, but if you do fall, you'll be stronger and your bones won't break. There was a really interesting study that was just published very recently. This has created quite a stir. It's called the Lift More trial. And in this study, they really wanted to look at kind of a novel high-load strength training system and program on bone density. So you can see there they had an 8-month, 2-time-a-week program. It was only 30 minutes per session. So it was actually rather brief. They had 101 women enrolled, and so they had this high-intensity resistance and impact training program. So look at what they did. They did deadlift, overhead press, loaded back squat, and they did a jump chin-up. And the jump chin-up was basically, so there's the bar, and I can't really do a chin-up, so I'm kind of jump up to the bar, so my momentum can help me come up, but then I'm just going to release, and I'm going to drop and land, and that's where the impact comes from. So it wasn't really about the chin-up necessarily. That was some good strengthening, but it was about the jump, high loading on the jump, and then the landing part. So really kind of novel program. And you can see that their control group did some lighter strength training. And what they found was in that high intensity resistance training group, they got significantly greater benefits. And so if you look at the bone mineral density here in the lumbar spine and in the femoral neck, if you kind of follow that through, in the control group went down a little bit. The resistance training group improved, and so those comparisons were statistically significant. So they not only prevented a decline, they added bone density in 8 months. So really novel type of program that relied on high loading. So in this case, high loading really worked. High loading was very important, and so that was kind of the take-home message there. You can also see kind of the figures here, especially looking at the difference over here in this area. As an aside, they actually did some functional measures, and they found that physical function improved. This is the kind of a times, was the time get up and go test. Functional, this is the sit to stand, this is the functional reach test. All of those improved in these older women. And a lot of people were concerned, and this is why this study has not been done. You're taking people with osteoporosis, and you're loading them heavy. It's going to be dangerous, right? You can't do that. And what they found, no, it was safe. It didn't increase fracture risk at all. We had no problems. Obviously, they were heavily supervised for form and were kind of taught very well how to do these movements. And so it really worked well, and there were no issues. They actually had another study that they published based on the same information. And what they found was that their thoracic kyphosis also improved. which again was thought not to be able to happen, but their kyphosis actually improved. So I think that was a really important finding, secondary finding in this Lift More trial as well. So again, this was just published earlier this year, so very hot off the press. So when we look at bone density, all the latest evidence is really saying you've got to load heavy, right? You really do. You really need to load heavy. So what about if we aren't necessarily concerned about osteoporosis, but we want to look at strength as an outcome variable? What does that look like? So we're going to kind of walk through a timeline of different studies, kind of going back to some earlier studies. This one was published in 2004. So systematic review of progressive resistance strength training in older adults. And we're going to see a couple different studies by this same group that have been published. They looked at 62 different studies, 62 different trials that compared progressive resistance training with some sort of control group. And that could be a no exercise control group or kind of a basic cardio or stretching group, kind of a sham intervention type thing. And what they found is there was a positive effect on strength, right? If you trained for strength, you got stronger. We all kind of know that. But what was interesting about this study is that there was a lot of heterogeneity in the results. It wasn't one-to-one. The harder you train or the more you load, the stronger you got. They didn't find that. They found some big discrepancies in the amount of improvement that people had versus kind of what went into the effort or the loading scheme of the program itself. It was not a one-to-one kind of outcome comparison. Okay? And so when you look at kind of their conclusion here is that it results in improvements in muscle strength. It also results in some aspects of function like gait speed. There wasn't really any clear effect on disability, but disability is kind of its own unique thing. Not a lot of studies follow that, and so we're not going to really kind of focus on that. Okay? So then this group did another follow-up study a few years later in 2009, and this one is from a group called the Cochrane Collaboration. And the Cochrane group is a group of kind of experts specifically that say we need a systematic review in this area. They find where the gaps are. They commission a group to do that review, and it's very strictly done. When you think about systematic reviews, the Cochrane group publishes the highest quality systematic reviews that are out there. So very strict guidelines and standards. So when they looked at this study, again, they found some very interesting results. They had about 130 trials, almost 7,000 people are represented in these studies. They're all randomized controlled trials, so very high quality studies that looked at strength training. Most of these did use machines, so kind of put an asterisk beside that. Most of these studies do use machines. Some used tubing or bands, but most were on machines. And look at the results. The effect on strength was clear. That if you do progressive resistance training, you're going to get stronger, just like they found. Some of the improvements in physical function, again, varied. And so there were some specific functional tasks that tended to improve more than others. Getting out of a chair tended to improve a lot. That seems to make sense, correct? If you don't have the strength to get out of a chair, I mean, you don't need a lot of balance, you don't need much of anything other than some leg strength to get out of that chair. Okay, that makes sense. Moderate effect on gait speed, but here is where it kind of also started to fall apart. They found a small effect on other aspects of physical ability. In other words, just because you did a lot of strength training doesn't mean everything improved. Some things improved. And now I'll tell you, this systematic review, along with a few others, had a really big influence in kind of my thinking about training for older adults. That influenced a lot of kind of what I looked at. So all these were statistically significant, but again, they found out that, and this was kind of one of their statements, is when you looked at the relationship between strength and function, improvements in strength do not always equate to similar improvements in function. That was one of their statements in there. Okay? So we look at strength training, we know it's important, right? We want to include it, but is it the kind of golden apple that we're all striving for? Like, is that the only thing you need to do? This would say, maybe not. You will get improvements in some areas, but maybe not in some other areas. A little bit more recently, this is a meta-analysis, and so what a meta-analysis does, it's different from a systematic review. It again asks a question, finds all the studies in that area that meet their criteria, but then it goes one step further. It actually takes all the data from all those studies and puts it together in one study. So let's say one study had 20 people, another had 30, and another had 15, which is typically the case. They would put all that data together, and now they'd have a study with 55 people in it, right? It adds a lot of power to the results. So they did this meta-analysis, and they looked at this dose-response relationship of training to outcomes. And again, I highlighted kind of the nuts and bolts take-home message. The relationship was nonlinear. Again, meaning just because you train harder with heavier loads does not mean you're going to be the one that gets stronger or that you're going to be the one that improves your function more. Okay? Input does not always equal output in the case of strength training. And they went a step forward, and they were talking about some other studies and kind of the evidence in general. And they said what we see is that there's a threshold. It's very clear that there's a strength threshold that exists, especially in relation to function. And that is, if you don't have enough strength to do functional tasks, what do you need to do? Strength training, right? You need that basic muscle strength to support your activities. But then once you have enough strength, is more going to make you more functional, I'm going to use that term, and more functional and more functional? Not necessarily, at least from a low standard that we look at related to functional abilities of our activities of daily living, right? If we measure things like 8-foot up and go and chair stand and other ways to measure it, it doesn't mean it won't help you excel maybe in an athletic event, okay? So we're not kind of looking at that aspect of it. There's definitely a threshold that exists, and we'll kind of look at that later. So this next one looked at 21 randomized control trials that was going to look at different intensities of strength training. Again, when you look at this progressive resistance strength training, that some aspects of the body require higher loads than other aspects of the body. And I think this is a really novel way to kind of look at that. But when you look at, again, the threshold aspect, we see that if you train even at lower loads and lower intensities, you are still going to get stronger. You might not get as strong in the end. You might not get to a certain level of strength as quickly, but your strength improves. And what we see is once you surpass the threshold, then kind of you're good to go. And we can think about it, we all have different levels of strength in this room, but we can all get out of our chair very easily, right? We don't think about it. The person that can squat 500 pounds can't get out of their chair any easier than you. But can they squat 500 pounds better than you? Yeah, absolutely, right? For sure. But again, we have to think about our clients, what their outcomes, what they're looking for. Strength is one way to measure improvement. But I would say in many cases, it's not the best way to measure improvement. In fact, even if they don't have very large improvements in strength, that can have a big impact on their functional abilities. And it can really improve their quality of life. Okay? This one, looking at different strength training variables on strength gains. So if we typically look at strength itself, we say, okay, what does it take to get stronger? This one was very interesting because it only found that training duration had a significant dose-response relationship. Meaning, it doesn't matter what your load was or what your sets and reps were, as long as you train long enough, you were going to get stronger. Kind of interesting, right? We think about, your design, it very much determines how strong you get and how quickly you get it. But if they said, as long as you train for at least a year, that it all kind of evens out, which is a very interesting kind of approach. Now, there were some limitations to the study. Remember, one study does not a conclusion make, so it's just kind of an interesting finding. And so we look at, what do other studies that look at this dose-response relationship have to say? So this next review by Board and colleagues looked at 25 randomized controlled trials, again, looking at these key variables of strength training. And again, what did they find? Well, they found that training period, again, was a big indicator of how strong the subjects got. But they also found that intensity did matter, and time under tension also mattered. that these were additional variables they uncovered from the trials that they looked at, and those all had significant effects on how strong a person got. But what was the largest effect size? Training longer. That was really more important than the other variables. Okay? When you looked at kind of some additional variables, these variables at the bottom, what we call independent predictors, and kind of how you look at predictors, this is, again, where kind of some research differences come into play. There are a lot of things that are related to other things, right? You can look at one variable and how it relates to another variable, but what matters is how all the variables relate to each other, correct? So when we look at these variables at the top, what they do is they put one variable into their equation, the one that's most highly or closely correlated with that outcome, and then what that does, it changes the relationship of the other variables. So you can start with 10 significant independent predictors, and you put the first one into your model, and 4 of them drop off. They're no longer significant. And you put the next one in, and the rest of them drop off. So what you're really stuck with are the 2 most important. That's kind of the cream of the crop. But the other independent correlations came down from things that you see at the bottom here. So are those important? We're not really sure. Not really sure. Okay. Now let's look at moderate to heavy loads. This is a meta-analysis that really wanted to compare the 2 different loading schemes. And so only wanted to look at studies that compared a moderate to a heavy loading scheme. Instead of some of these other systematic reviews and meta-analysis that were a little more broad, kind of included a little bit more broad range of studies, they wanted to be much more focused and look at, okay, let's really look at load. Let's try to isolate the impact of load on strength gains in the elderly. And you see, I didn't highlight this, but if you kind of look down at the bottom, if you look down kind of at the bottom here, resistance training at a lower than traditionally recommended intensities of load may suffice to induce substantial gains in muscle strength. So we're coming back to how heavy do we really need to load? One, heavy loading is okay. We see that time and time again in studies. We shouldn't be scared of heavy loading. The Lift More study, I mean, they're loading heavy using squats and deadlifts and jumps. Everybody was okay because they were well supervised, even with osteoporosis. So we see this time and time again. It's not about being older that's the problem. It's about the individual, correct? It's what are your specific issues. You probably shouldn't load heavy if you have X, Y, or Z, but as a whole, we've seen it's very safe and it's effective. The question is, do they need to load heavy? That's the alternative question. And what we see in a lot of these studies like this, the evidence keeps pointing to, they probably don't need to unless they have a specific goal in mind, such as a sport or an activity that requires heavier loading. Okay? So if I've got an individual as an example who loves to garden, and one of the things they do is they load up that wheelbarrow, and they've got to lift that wheelbarrow and roll it, and they want to keep doing that, I might want to train them a little heavier, right? A little bit more aggressively, compared to somebody else who doesn't have that activity in mind. So we do have to look individually at the person, but moderate loads, lower than recommended loads, even lower than ACSM recommended loads look like they are beneficial. Okay? All of this evidence led to a recommendation. This is a group of researchers, and I don't know if you know the name Wayne Westcott. He's been very widely published, does a lot of research with older adults up at the South Shore YMCA. They recommended, look, all the evidence is showing if older adults did just do a minimal routine, if they just got on even machines, not machines. If they just got on machines and did a circuit of machine-based strength training, guess what? It works. It's effective. Now, I know we're very functional in here, and I like to think about functional, but here's what we can't deny. I take a kind of a frailer person, I put them on machines, I'm going to help them surpass that strength threshold that they need, and especially if they've got balance and gait issues and they can't do all these other movement patterns I want them to do, guess what? Machines are okay. They work. Okay? So we need to kind of understand there is a place for the whole gamut of exercise. I kind of talked about curves, right? I've kind of followed curves for a long time, and I really used to poo-poo on curves, right? Oh, that's not enough, right? That's not intense enough. You're going to plateau. But here's the thing. If you're an older woman and you're sedentary and you go on the curve system, you are going to get stronger. You really are. And are you going to get strong enough to surpass that threshold? Probably. Now, if you've got other things you work on, maybe you need something a little more robust. But here's the thing. Those basic programs work. So let's just accept that. The research is very replete with studies that do basic strength training studies. And the reason Wayne Westcott is on here is because that's what he's done. Let's just put people on a basic machine-based strength training circuit and see what happens. Everybody improves. They all improve. Their strength improves and their function improves. Okay? So now, in this minimal dose approach, what are they recommending? What is minimal to them? So we have 2 days per week, about 30 minutes per session. What does that look like? Does it look like the Lift More trial? Okay, at least from a frequency perspective, yeah. A single set routine, just one set, simple machine-based exercises with 8 to 12 reps. One set of 8 to 12 reps. Now, when we look at that sort of program, you say, well, what is going on? How could that improve? We know that as soon as someone starts a strength training program, the first thing to improve is not their muscle. The first thing to improve is their neuromuscular system, right? It is a neural improvement. It is a neural drive. And there's a lot of different changes that happen in that neural control of muscle where you actually get stronger without getting any more muscle mass, okay? So we know that even a simple routine like this, if you do it for 8 to 12 weeks, you're going to get improvements in that neural drive. Strength is going to go up. Other aspects of function are going to go up as well. Yes, you can ask.
But what about machines where they're seated, pushing and pulling, and spinal compression? Does that concern you at all?
So the question was, if you look at machines with seated pushing and pulling and spinal compression, that doesn't really concern me. If somebody really has a postural deviation that's significant, I would be concerned about it, but otherwise, I wouldn't. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
And then in defining elderly, it's an older adult one study that said elderly defined in the text
Right.
as 67.8 years, and then you said frail elderly. So how are you defining?
Okay, so how are we defining old and elderly and frail elderly? The studies do use different definitions. Some will use 55 plus, some will use 65 plus, some will use 60 plus, some only include 75 to 85-year-olds, so they are kind of all over the place. So when we talk about older adults, we're talking about 55 and up. Now, if you're 55 and over, it's okay. You just have to set at least some sort of chronological age threshold. Most of the studies, however, focus on that 65 to 70 kind of median. That's where the bulk of the studies kind of focus on. And the frailty, the frail individuals tend to be older, but they don't have to be. So they might say just 55 and over, but we're looking for frail individuals that meet this very specific criteria. And frailty is a very specific phenotype. Like there's different criteria you have to meet in order to be considered frail. So we come back to this threshold of, how strong do you need to be? And I ask this a lot. And what it looks like in the literature is the answer is strong enough. And I don't mean that flippantly. The literature seems to support you need to be strong enough. Now the question is, for what? For functional, basic activities, it's not as much as more athletic or competitive activities. But even if you look at the athletes in the senior games, what's really interesting, Becca Georgray, who's a researcher with these athletes and is doing a presentation tomorrow, I think, on her senior fitness test that she designed for these athletes. It's very clear they are stronger than the average population. But you know how much time they spend in actual strength training? About 2 sessions, 30 minutes per week. And they don't really load or go hard. But yet they're stronger. Why are they so much stronger and more functional? Because they're doing this other stuff, right? It's the accumulation of all these other activities that they're engaged in. Okay? So here's another review that looked at elastic resistance training. Can you use tubing? Yes, you can. Your body doesn't care what the resistance is. If you are meeting that threshold of intensity, then you're okay. Now let's make sure we understand you have to meet the threshold of intensity. We go back to that picture I showed earlier. People kind of sitting in chairs doing easy stuff. It's not about doing easy stuff. Okay? You still have to challenge your muscle in order for it to grow. Okay? We're just saying probably at a little bit lower of intensity than that really heavy loading stuff. But your body doesn't matter what the load is. Even with circuit resistance training, so I talked about the kind of that curves model. That works as well. So a lot of different types of strength training. There are going to be people here at this summit. They're going to talk about different types of resistance training. Robert Linkle and his facility, they do a lot of squats and deadlifts and rope pulls, pulling weights, and all sorts of different activities. It's all good, right? It all plays into building strength and building function, as long as you're also working on the other aspects of function to be well-rounded. That I think is what's really important. Okay. So I'm going to skip through a couple of things here because I think we've focused on it. But this one looks specifically at if you do strength training, will your balance improve? And it really doesn't. Strength training has very little impact on balance. Again, going back to those all different areas of function. Now, will you be better off by being stronger if you fall? Yes. We see that there's less injury risk for people that are stronger when they do fall. Okay? But if you think of that strength training is automatically going to improve balance, it really doesn't. We see it will go up some, so we see certain matrices will go up. How you test balance matters. Certain populations may benefit. So again, if you're frail and you can barely get out of a chair, if you get stronger and you build up your lower body strength, you are likely going to also improve your balance because strength is also a limiting factor in your balance, right? But outside of that, we see very little impact of strength on balance. Yes? Yes, although it doesn't include core strength. There's not a lot of studies that have singled that out. There have been a couple of really interesting studies that have looked at core strength with balance. Core strength is tied to balance, but again, it's not really clear what that relationship is. More work needs to be done in that area. That's a good question. Okay? This is just more about balance. Okay, so let's look at frailty then and physical function, because I think this is an area that's really important. So this review looks specifically at resistance training in that physically frail population. And like I said, there are specific criteria you must meet to be frail. It includes low levels of muscle strength, and you have to have some impairment in physical abilities. Those are kind of two hallmark factors of frailty. And so if you do resistance training in this physically frail group, does it work? Oh, sorry. Okay. And we see that in this study specifically, they looked at a lot of different studies initially. They ended up with only 16 because most of the studies didn't meet their quality criteria. So these 16 studies were higher quality information. But what they ended up finding from this, I think, is really interesting. Look at their conclusion. Their frequency, 1 to 6 sessions per week, a training volume of 1 to 3 sets, 6 to 15 reps, intensity of 30 to 70% RM, all promoted enhancements in muscle power and strength and functional outcomes. Wow, a lot bigger range that we normally thought possible is helpful for even these frail individuals. Again, that there's evidence for kind of a minimal dose approach. What they really didn't fully address, probably because they only had 16 studies, was looking at, well, if you did more, did that tend to lead to better outcomes? And they didn't really do a good analysis of that part. So we know a range works. They didn't really help to solidify whether more load, more frequent sessions, that sort of thing was better. So there's a review, physical activity exercises, countermeasures to physical frailty and sarcopenia. And in this review, they looked at a wide variety of literature on exercise. So it wasn't just related to strength training. But again, they found that strength training was an important variable in this population. So when you're looking at people that are physically frail, doing strength exercises is very important. But we asked the question, and this is something that this review also brought up, is when we talk about function, what are we talking about? Okay, what type of functional tasks are we really concerned about? Is it possible that some tasks are more strength-dependent tasks, like getting out of your chair, and other tasks are more balance-dependent tasks? Some tasks are more speed or power-dependent tasks. Okay, yes, we see that certain tasks require different kind of inputs or different abilities when we look at that functional spectrum. So we shouldn't be surprised that strength training is an important variable, but it's not the only variable. So we need to continue to work holistically on a lot of these other systems simultaneously. Okay? That means matching up what your client is wanting to do. What does your client want to do? We had a client who had gone through a double, I think it's a knee replacement, not hip replacement. I think he went through double knee replacements, and he was a downhill skier, recreationally. But he had 2 ski-out chalets at 2 different resorts, right? So he had obviously the money. That's where his family went. They went skiing all winter long. That was their thing that they did. And so he had his knee replacements. What does his doctor tell him? No more skiing for you. He's like, okay, go ahead and put me under, right? I'm done. I don't need to live anymore. You're taking away the thing in life that I love. So he came to us and said, look, my doctor said I can't ski anymore. He's like, okay, well, we're not your doctor. Do you want to ski again? Absolutely. Let's train you for skiing. So we trained him to get back to downhill skiing, which he did, right? His functional task was a lot different than the others. Are we going to train everybody in that way? No, because what is he doing? He's doing a lot of lateral hopping drills. He's doing one-leg hopping drills, high-intensity stuff. Okay? His functional outcome was different than others. So matching the program to those specific functional outcomes, I think also is supported in the literature, but the literature is way behind. Okay? That's the problem. The research literature is limited in what it can tell us. There are a lot of studies about basic strength training. There's very few studies that look more at functional resistance training, and the ones that have usually been small, and they've been so all over the place in their methodology that you almost can't put it together, right? It's just too confusing, unfortunately. Okay? So kind of going back to our model there. Now, I want to mention power training, because power training obviously is something that's near and dear to me. I've done a lot of looking into the power training literature. I've been tracking it for, the past, 13 or 14 years at least. And the power training literature has continued to grow and grow and grow, and it's always saying the same thing, and that's what we look for in evidence is there consistency in the findings. So power is not necessarily this. It's not necessarily power lifting. In fact, when you look at the power that guy is generating, he doesn't generate as much power as somebody throwing a little ball in a shot put. Because, of course, power is force and speed. And the shot put is going so much faster, the power output is a lot greater. So when we think about power, we have to think about a variable like loading, right? Well, how much do you need to load in order to generate significant power? And it can be done with a variety of loads. Power also declines earlier and faster than muscle strength. So when we're looking at things that are on the decline that we have to be concerned about, strength has always been there. So, we got to focus on strength. You got to focus on strength. But power is declining quicker because not only is strength declining, but your speed is declining. People slow down, right? We saw that in those 101-year-old sprinters, okay? You slow down. Your ability to contract those muscles slow down, so power is really impacted. And when we look at the relationship of strength to function and then compare that with the relationship of power to function, this is a classic study. It's old, in 2002, but I love the graph, and all the literature since then supports this same concept. Strength is an important predictor of function. Power is a little bit better predictor of function. It is a little bit more important than strength. So we're not saying strength is unimportant. Power seems to be more important than strength when we get older. Okay? So this review, published in 2012, made these conclusions. Power is a better predictor of function than muscle strength. Power training is well tolerated and it's safe for a wide variety of individuals. Power training obviously is going to be more effective in improving power. Strength will improve power, right? Because it's improving one half of that equation. But it doesn't improve it as much as power training does. And at least in 2012, they were saying the ones that have looked at function are showing pretty consistently that power can probably improve functional abilities and a broader spectrum of functional abilities than standard slow velocity strength training can, okay? So that was in 2012. Let's go back to 2007. Let's look at this study. Again, this is one individual study, but it looked at a lot of different studies and tried to compile the evidence. And so if you look at this, we talked about balance. Here we see that strength training improved balance strength training improved balance just a little bit, okay? Power training improved balance in most studies more significantly, okay? So we got that little blip in strength training from strength training, but it was greater in power training. Chair rise time, yep, you improve chair rise time when you strength training. Power training, you improve it better because what does the test do? It measures how quickly can you stand up, right? That's what it's measuring, okay? Gait speed, a little bit better. Who got stronger though? The strength training group got stronger, but the power training group improved their function more. So again, that disparity in strength and function is seen here kind of across these studies that looked at power training. Okay? 2009, here's another systematic review. They looked at 12 studies, and this I like to include this one because they looked at kind of a difference in doing functional exercises, what we kind of call free, kind of moving power exercises versus machine-based exercises as well. So they had a kind of variety there. And within that, if you look at their results, you see that 10 out of the 12 power training groups collectively across these studies improved significantly, whereas just under half of the strength training groups improved significantly. So almost all of the power training groups improved, less than half of the strength training groups improved in their functional ability, okay? 2011, a meta-analysis, so again, this is a high level of evidence. When they looked to try to pull all the evidence, what they found is that the studies were kind of small, so they were a little bit weaker studies. So can't rely on this specifically, but if you looked at them across the board, again, they found the functional outcomes were always a little bit better in the power training group, okay, than in the strength training group. So this review is much more recent. Muscle power training in the institutionalized frail. So let's look at that lower functioning group specifically and think about power training there. Now, again, it is like those sprinters, right? When you ask frail, especially institutionalized frail, to move as fast as they can, it's not very fast. But it's as fast as they can, and that's the important thing. It doesn't have to look fast. Their brain is trying to get that muscle to contract as fast as possible. That's what's important, especially in power training. And so, does it work? Does it help to counteract these functional declines that we've seen in the? Sorry, I keep thinking I have another slide here for it. This frail elderly, specifically those that are institutionalized. I can need my glasses here. So when you begin to look in the abstract and you kind of look down at the bottom aspect of it, what's the conclusion? It works. Power training in this frail group works. And other studies and other papers have come out and have also kind of looked at the safety of power training because I can't get these people to move fast, right? They're going to damage themselves. They're going to hurt themselves. And we've seen across the board that's not true. In fact, where we see injuries occurring in studies is when they're doing their testing. Like if they're doing a max 1 RM test, that tends to be where we see some injuries occurring. But in the power training itself, we don't see injuries occurring. So even in a kind of low functional groups that are institutionalized, we see that it works. And so when they looked at trying to compile the evidence and making some recommendations here. So this one is just from a few years ago in 2016. They looked at 44 studies that used power training with older adults, and 13 made direct head-to-head comparison of resistance training and power training. They said, okay, what can we get from this? And so their bottom line recommendations down here, okay, move as fast as you can. Okay, that's part of it. You have to move as fast as you can. You can't just move faster. You have to try to really push yourself and move quickly. You can use low training loads with power training, lower than what we see with strength training thresholds. So one study I'm just going to pull out one study because I think this is very interesting and kind of blows my mind still. So I teach in Arkansas, but there's a lady at the University of Arkansas who's done some power training studies, and she published a paper just a couple years ago in which she had two groups. They both did power training. The one group got on their machines and did their power training, like an explosive chest press or an explosive row. The other group sat in a chair and performed the same movements, but with nothing. Like literally, I'm sitting here doing this, and I'm doing this. And guess what? They both improved equally in their function with no load whatsoever. Now, I'm not kidding you. I read the abstract and I went, what? That's not right. And I read it again. I was like, there's got to be something wrong with this study. And I read the study, and I read it again, and then I called the researcher since she was just down the road. I was like, you got to tell me about this because I don't believe it, okay? The key seems to be, and some other studies are showing this, that it might just be the speed itself. Moving as fast as you can regardless of load. And I'm not going to show this. I'm getting ready to submit a symposium for the ACSM annual summit, and I'm going to go back a slide. This guy up here, Mikel Izquierdo, is going to be one of the speakers on the symposium that I'm organizing. And one of the other guys, he's from Spain. One of the other guys from Spain has done some mind-blowing work looking at, I did a little webinar, or I did a kind of coffee and conversation video of this last year when this study came out, and they took older adults and they did what's called force velocity profiling. They said, okay, you can have power, but what they found is that two people with the same power can have different contributions of force and velocity, and that some individuals are low on force, and some individuals are low on speed, and that probably if you match your intervention, because if you're low on force, you probably need to do heavier loads. If you're low on speed, you need to do lower loads and move faster. We don't have a randomized control trial yet. They're doing that right now, but that's really intriguing to me. Okay, again, going back to this idea of just because we're all loading doesn't mean we're all going to get the same benefit. We probably all need something different, and we're just now kind of diving into more specifics about that. Yes, sir. Not necessarily. They haven't looked into the muscle fiber typing really specifically yet related to that, but I know they do mention that. I'd have to go back in a couple of their articles they published and look at that. They do talk about it a little bit, but I think they said we don't think it's related to just to fiber typing. And what happens as you get older too is we all tend to become a little bit more similar in fiber typing as well, which is kind of an interesting phenomenon, okay? So back to this one. Low training load, simple training methods, you don't have to do anything too extreme, low volume, low frequency training. Those were all shown to work, right? As long as you're moving as fast as possible, that you don't have to do really long sessions, you don't have to do it 5 days a week. Again, going back to that 2 days a week, 30 minutes, that is probably sufficient to get a lot of improvement in power with power training and in function. Okay? They found that muscle power is a better predictor of function than strength as well when they kind of looked at that. They then made the conclusion that if we're thinking about improving function and we're thinking about targeting our interventions, they recommend targeting power more than strength. They think that the evidence is pretty clear, and it's been building for a long time now, that probably improving power is going to be better at improving function, and so that's what we should focus on in our training programs. Now, of course, most of our training programs, because this is how we're taught, we move slow and controlled, right? Go back to strength training. Time under tension was recognized as a variable, but that's for a strength outcome, and so maybe strength is not necessarily the outcome we want to maximize function. Maybe power is a better kind of outcome to look at for improving function. This led a group, and you see Mikel Izquierdo up there, to respond to that minimal dose approach to resistance training and said, hold on, we agree you make some good points, but look at that title. You can no longer avoid being explosive if you want to create really effective programs in elderly subjects. Okay, and they make a very strong case based on a lot of different studies. This one, hot off the press, just published in 2019, looking at high versus low intensity power training. So again, looking at loading. Go back to what we talked about. Probably you can load low, and that's exactly what they found when they looked at the differences in loading, is that it doesn't really matter how hard you load. You can get improvements in physical function even at low training loads. You know what a low training load looks like? Maybe 20% of your 1 RM. That's an easy load. What they've also found in other research that have looking at perceived exertion with strength and power training, because power training, you're using such low loads, even though you're trying to move fast, people feel like it's easy. And so some public health kind of official types are thinking, well, why aren't we having everybody doing power training? Because if they feel like it's easy, they're more likely to do it. So maybe we can get people off their butts and quit being sedentary. Good point. So this is the force velocity profiling. I don't have time to kind of go into it because we're coming to an end here, but kind of that reiterates some things. Even in the world of physical therapy, so I mentioned I teach a physical therapy program. These physical therapists, as they've looked at the literature, have also kind of responded to that power being a therapeutic target. Look, if we have people in therapy that are older, we need to try to get them to move fast. We need to get them to move fast. Build a strength base, which actually isn't necessary, but then get them to move fast. Do we have any physical therapists in here? A few physical therapists? Okay, and this is classic in physical therapy. Okay, kind of across the board as a whole, physical therapists tend to baby their older clients, right? I mean, a lot of physical therapists, unless you know what you're doing and you're progressive, you are not loading. One of the guys that we have here, Dustin Jones, he's with the Senior Rehab Project. They just rebranded to Gyros. They are promoting some squats, deadlifts, sled pushes for older geriatric physical therapy patients. And they're going into, he goes into people's homes. He's a home health PT. He goes in their home. He's got this video. It's great. He takes this guy on a walker, throws some kettlebells on it. Guess what? That's a sled push, right? Come on now. I mean, that's kind of the stuff we need. He also understands power is very important, getting to move fast. So even things like, I'm just going to try to walk as fast as I can. I'm going to get up out of a chair as fast as I can. Those very simple training methods really work, okay? All right. I need to kind of skip through. Here's a guy doing a 30-inch box jump. He's 83. Doing a 30-inch box jump. Pretty amazing. Look at that great form. Can older adults do plyometrics? Yes, they can. This is also, early in my career, I would have said, heck no, you're going to kill those people, right? You're going to hurt their knees. They're going to fall over. If you teach them how to jump and you teach them how to land, doesn't mean we need all of our 83-year-olds to do 30-inch box jumps. But doesn't mean we keep them from doing 30-inch box jumps, correct? Yes. Push them. Let them explore. So we come back to what about, squats? What about deadlifts? What about those loads? I still think that squats and deadlifts are highly valuable strength training movements, okay? The literature has not caught up with the methodology. Most of the research literature, because these are more researchers, are looking at, let's just do machines or let's just do something basic. There is very little research on squats and deadlifts and those sorts of movements for older adults. In fact, I have a student who was going to do a literature review project this summer on that very topic. She could find so little information on that topic specifically, she changed topics, right? It shows you we are behind in some of our rationale. But I think there's a good rationale for doing squats and deadlifts and those sorts of movements. So if you do those, I think those are great movements to utilize. But again, when it comes down to loading, does that mean you have to load them as heavy as possible? No, I don't think so, right? I think the movement is what's really important, okay? We also have to think about what I call the opportunity cost. If you spend all your time focused on being stronger, you lost the opportunity to work on some other areas. You've lost the opportunity to work on agility, dynamic balance, coordination, multidirectional movement patterns if all you're doing is that strength training. So we do need a mix of variables to be included. So here are kind of just some personal some conclusions from the research as we wrap up. And of course, we all bring different biases to the research, right? None of us are unbiased. So I'm presenting research. I can't present all of it. I don't know all of it. But so here are my personal bias conclusions based on that. I think strength is essential, but you have to get the threshold. That's what's important. And once you get the threshold, we need to look at some other things. And I also think that we can probably reach that threshold just by doing power training without even really doing any slow velocity strength training, because more strength does not always equate to more function. Older adults can load heavy. Won't critique anybody for loading heavy, but really, should they have to? No, I don't think they have to. I think we can really get significant improvements by doing lower to moderate loads. Of course, with power training, those loads can be really low. I think there's other interesting research about that I haven't included. And so personally, I think we should, although machines are good and we show that benefit, I think if we really did some good high quality research, I think we would see more benefit for following these 7 fundamental movement patterns. That if we teach people how to squat, because squat is not only a functional activity, it requires a lot of the body. There's mobility that's required of the joints. There's a movement patterning. There's controlling your center of mass when you go through a squat pattern. So there's a lot involved with that. Of course, deadlift we consider very functional because we're always lifting, right? We're mimicking that. But I think these 7 fundamental movement patterns have shown to be very effective, even if the research hasn't caught up with it yet. So those are my kind of personal conclusions. Appreciate you guys being here and trudging through the research with me, and I hope you guys have a great summit.